What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Pack Pride Podcast. I'm your host, Cory Smith, here with Michael Clark, football analyst for Pack Pride. Michael, before we jump into things, obviously we're going to be talking about the offensive line today. First of all, how are you doing, man?
Doing wonderful. Hope everybody is.
Yes, sir. Doing well over here, just busy. Always 9-month-old officially yesterday, and I got another one ready for her 7-year-old birthday. So
it's been lit over there.
Yes, exactly. All that in preparing for football season, which is here in exactly 2 weeks from the moment we're talking right now. So it'll be even less than that by the time we put this podcast out over the weekend. But as always, guys, before we get things started, I want to remind our listeners, visit our iTunes, Google Play Store, anywhere that you get the podcast, and give us a rating, help get the word out there to the rest of Wolfpack Nation. Also, make sure to check out all of Pack Pride's coverage throughout the rest of football and basketball offseason for $1 for the first month or 30% off for 1 full year, and get the entire 24/7 Sports Network included in that deal. So head over to packpride.com to find out more about becoming a premium subscriber. Also have to give a shout out to the Scott Wood home lending team. Is there anything this man can't do? After a successful career at NC State and playing professional basketball, Scott has turned his sights on conquering the mortgage world. Reach out to him today if you're interested in financing the purchase or build of your dream home, looking to purchase your first investment property, or even just to buy land. Great rates in 50 states. Yes, you heard that right. The ability to lend in all 50 states. Scott is looking forward to sending out those pre-approvals and getting your home journey started. All right, Michael. So offensive line for NC State this upcoming year. We know some guys that are returning. There's a lot of guys that need to step up. Before we jump into this, let's go over all of the offensive linemen here. I've done it with every other position. We'll go through it here. We're just going to go in alphabetical order, given how many guys there are. And then we'll discuss importance, guys that we expect to step up this year. But Blair Alexander, Carter Alls, 2 guys that are walk-ons. Anthony Belton, Anthony Carter Jr., Lyndon Cooper, Jaleel Davis, Derek Eason, Sean Hill, Rico Jackson, Dawson Jaramillo, Jackson McCray, another walk-on for the team. Patrick Matan, Matt McKay, another walk-on as well. Timothy McKay, Dylan McMahon, Yusuf Mugerbil, an interesting transfer that we'll talk about in just a second, which is another technical walk-on, but a guy they obviously wanted several years ago. Obi Abasuyi, Jakari Peak, Luke Peters, another walk-on. Darian Rivers, Kamen Smith, Cameron Todd as a walk-on, and then Rylan Van rounds out all of the offensive linemen on this roster for NC State. Michael, just your thoughts on where the offensive line stands heading into this season and what needs to happen in order for this unit to improve from last year, especially with so many new faces behind them.
I'm kind of cautiously optimistic right now. I think you know what you have in 3 positions. At right tackle, projected Timothy McKay, left tackle Anthony Belton, and then, of course, Dylan McMahon at center. The guards, and I'm actually doing a clipboard right now to be ready this afternoon, which is Thursday when we're doing this. Guard is a question, and if anybody is telling you it's not a question, then I don't think they're being 100% honest with you. We saw Lyndon Cooper tweet out a picture put out a picture on Instagram, I believe it was, from a hospital bed on August 7th. That wasn't a good sign. I'm kind of going more into detail on that in the clipboard, but he was the projected starter probably at left guard. You got Derek Eason, probably projected to start at right guard. He is average at best, in my opinion. He's really struggled when asked to play extended snaps, and this is year 6, so not expecting a huge jump for him. You just got some questions. Who steps up on the other side? Does somebody outplay Eason? It is concerning to be at this point. And it's not taking anything away from anybody on this roster, but there's not a lot of proven players at offensive guard, and that is a little nervous, especially going into a season and a slate of games like NC State plays.
Yeah, and I was going to say, let's go to kind of the most known commodity, I guess, at this point. First, we'll go with Dylan McMahon. Not necessarily at the position he's playing, because he is moving to that center spot where he played the end of last season. But this is a more natural position for him, a guy that has progressed really well in NC State's system over the last few years. One that at 6'4", 305 pounds could probably play another interior line position, but he's a little bit more of a natural center. What do you see for this season, and how important is his play this upcoming year?
Well, in high school, he was one of the better center prospects in the country, but just sheer need. He's played guard, started at guard for state the past couple of seasons, really playing out of position in his defense. Kind of up and down. Has had some moments though. Shifted to center. Really got the attention of people around the league last fall when he made that move, and also quite a bit of NFL buzz. So I think really what you're looking for him is to step up this year, not just on the field, but leadership is a big deal on that offensive line, especially with losing Grant Gibson, who's been kind of an anchor for that offensive line for 5, even 6 years, or however, several years. Anyways, that's a big ask. So you really need McMahon to step up on the field and as a leader on this team. I think he's one of the more important players on the roster.
Yeah, and then the tackle spots. We've talked about, these two guys stepping up. Obviously, Patrick Matan is a backup, and then Jalil Davis expected to be a backup at those spots. But Anthony Belton, Tim McKay, two guys that, Belton started out the season last year as the starter, looked really good in terms of run protection, and then struggled in pass protection after the Clemson game, and it kind of went downhill from there. What are your expectations for the tackle spot and what NC State really needs from them, especially given the fact that you're expected to start a left-handed quarterback and how important that right tackle spot is going to be for Tim McKay?
Well, if you start there, a lot's going to hinge on him. State's depth at quarterback or lack thereof is well known at this point, with 3 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster and 1 coming off a major shoulder injury. So Timothy McKay, if he's the guy at right tackle, which we expect him to be, has got to be good. Really flashed, I thought, came on as the season went on in 2022. Starting to see extended action, and really finally, I think, got comfortable in a spot. Has played all over since he's been at NC State. You slide over Anthony Belton, left tackle. I thought he really made some strides last year, somewhat inconsistent at times, but, I believe going into last year, I have to go back and look, he hadn't really played major football for, multiple years. I mean, the last significant snaps he took were at the JUCO level. I'm not sure what the year was, but that's neither here nor there. But so there was an adjustment period, but I really thought he stepped up. The expectations for him are extremely high. I mean, from a measurable standpoint, he's what NFL teams look for. He is a massive human being. If he can put it all together, I think there's a chance that him and McKay could be one of the combos in the ACC. But they've got to go out and do it on the field. Behind them, it's kind of like you're a little nervous because there's just not a lot of proven commodities there, if at all. Dawson Jaramillo, we've mentioned him in passing, can really play anywhere. But keep an eye on Jakari Peak. I'm going to talk about him in the clipboard that I'm releasing today. Former 4-star offensive lineman, very coveted player, year 2 in the program. Don't want to give too much away, but I'm going to talk more about him. But it's like everything on this roster, man. You've got talented players behind the starters, you feel like, but you got your fingers crossed that you don't have to depend on those players because the proven depth is just simply not there.
Yeah, I was going to say Peak was one of those guys that we talked a lot about last offseason as somebody that could come in and potentially make an impact. Didn't really generate a lot of buzz last season, but that's also because you had so many proven commodities coming
True freshman.
Yeah, exactly. As a true freshman, I think there was, we had kind of talked about, even you and I had kind of talked about like, hey, he could potentially come in and have kind of an Ike Ekwonu type jump. Not saying he's going to be Ike Ekwonu. Nobody ever said that. But Ike Ekwonu came in the fall and made an instant impact.
If you go back, interesting about Jakari Peak, if you go back, was really an unknown recruit as a junior and then became like a national guy. And what happened between his junior and senior year is he reshaped his body. I mean, this is a guy who dropped 50 pounds and ironically got to NC State and as a true freshman had trouble. I wouldn't say had trouble, but it was harder to put that weight back on in a good way, which is not uncommon as a freshman. Your body's going through a lot first time. And, I think he's up to probably 285, 290, maybe on a good day. Ideally, you probably want him at 300 to maybe a little heavier. So he's got a ways to go, but from a sheer talent standpoint, sounds like, he's making progress. And again, I'll go into more depth for our subscribers on in this clipboard.
All right. And then let's talk about the questionable position here. Obviously, the one of concern for most NC State fans is going to be at that guard spot. As we mentioned, not a ton of depth. I know you're going to put some more in your clipboard so that people can kind of digest that. But, having guys like Derek Eason, you mentioned obviously Lennon Cooper with being a little banged up. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. Anthony Carter Jr., someone that stepped up. We've heard a little bit about Kamen Smith too so far, and a guy like Sean Hill that we've mentioned multiple times. Who do you see making an impact at the guard position? And how big of a need is that to find somebody to truly step up and take over those roles?
Well, I think, like I said, the favorite to start on the right side right now is probably Derek Eason. And again, I've been critical of players, and that's my job. He has struggled mightily at times. This is year 6 for him. I mean, I think we're pulling for the kid, want him to take a step forward. But how realistic is that in year 6 with any program? I don't know. The opposite side, you've got Lyndon Cooper, who's obviously out right now. We don't talk about injuries, so I'm not going to go too deep in the weeds on that. But Anthony Carter Jr. seems to be making some headway. I think he was obviously a highly recruited player, ton of offers, suffered a knee injury as a senior in high school, which, set him back a little bit. He had to kind of, reshape his body, get into football shape, but he really seems to kind of be turning the corner at the position. It's just played a lot in the bowl game, but here he's a kid that looks like could potentially go from being a seldom used player to a key, maybe possibly even a starter up front. So that's quite the jump in 1 year. Can he handle it? And that remains to be seen, but he is talented and came from a great high school program in Butler out of the Charlotte area, was coached hard. So, you have to feel like he's got a chance to be a really good player. But again, it's like a lot of these guys, Cory, they've got, and not just the offensive line at certain positions, you have to be realistic. You have to go out and prove it. You can't just say, well, yeah, it's going to figure itself out, because if you think that's the case, then sometimes you're going to set yourself up for disappointment. Again, just hopeful that he progresses. I would probably project those two right now to be the first team guys.
And as far as the rest of the offensive line, are there any, obviously you've been a little more tuned in with this. I've been trying to cover everything along those lines between basketball, football, everything. Has there been anybody that you've heard as far as a potential wild card, guys like we mentioned Patrick Matan earlier, obviously Sean Hill is one that we've talked about quite a few times in the past, Jaleel Davis. We said Kamen Smith too.
Yeah.
Another one that I want to throw in there, Yusuf Mugerbil. I know, obviously, injuries have been a part of his past. Went to Florida, went to Colorado. What do things look like in terms of guys that could potentially be wild cards and make an impact this year?
Well, I think it's kind of a wait and see deal. You hope that you don't get too far down the depth chart per se. You mentioned Patrick Matan. I think he is unique in the fact that he has the capability and has played both guard and tackle in a reserve role. So that kind of could make him pretty valuable. I think this is year 3 or 4 in the program for him. So he's been around. A guy like Sean Hill, who interestingly, and this is after the clipboard, days after this is being released, has been taking some snaps at center with Lyndon Cooper out at guard. Cooper was actually likely going to be the backup center. So you kind of put State in a tough spot in both places. You're losing a possible reserve guard who's having to take reps at center. Again, we've seen this song and dance before. We hope that it doesn't snowball into injuries. But I don't want to panic or anything, but I do think we owe it to our subscribers and people who follow Pack Pride to voice when we believe that there is a concern at a position, and it is guard, in my opinion, offensively. We talk about receiver. I honestly feel better about receiver right now than I do guard.
Yeah, and it feels like, again, a lot of that has to do with health because, right now the receiver room, knock on wood here, but
there's some people banged up in the guard room. Again, I'm not going to go into details, and this is being released 3 days after the clipboard, so I can say that there are some guys banged up in the guard room, and it was already a room that was not particularly deep or proven. So that's where I'll leave that position.
I was going to say at the same time, this is obviously a team that, while it's on the playmakers, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, everybody to learn a new offense. The offensive line does have to learn some new schemes and things along those lines. How big of a change is that for the offensive line too, especially with a lot of new faces expected to step up and having to learn this new system and what their priorities are?
Well, I think it's an adjustment for everybody, and I think it is, probably worth mentioning that there's going to be some kinks NC State's going to have to work out on the go offensively. It's one thing to practice in fall camp and go against each other every single day, but when the bullets start flying week one, regardless of who you're playing, there's going to be an adjustment period. There's going to be some growing pains with this, and I think the offensive line, where you have to have 5 guys essentially function as one, have to all be on the same page. You could see, some uncharacteristic penalties. Just there could be some sloppiness in the first couple of weeks. You certainly hope that it's minimized, but I think if you're expecting the offense to go out and run smoothly from week one, you're probably going to be disappointed. And again, I think this offense is going to be good, but at the same time, we have to be realistic. And offensive line certainly is where it's going to start. Those guys have got to be on the same page. And again, I think the biggest thing, Cory, over the next couple of weeks is just trying to keep what the guys you do have available healthy. I know that sounds boring and simple, but it is just so important. We've seen what's happened in the past at NC State past couple of years. You've been decimated by injuries. And offensive line, Cory, just because of the physical nature of the position, the strength it requires, the growth, you just can't afford to have multiple injuries up front and continue to play particularly well, if that makes sense, because then you start relying on young guys who aren't ready to play physically or mentally, for that matter. So, again, the big thing for me over the next couple of weeks is some of these guys who are banged up need to get healthy, and then the guys who are healthy need to stay healthy. And, again, that sounds simple, but it is going to be a big key to NC State's season, not just the offensive line, because I think we feel good about the top players at nearly every position. But we were talking about this morning off the air, one or two guys goes down at pretty much every position, and you're like, oh, not great. And it's going to be a lot of luck is involved in football when it comes to having a good.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things. You got to have the horses.
Yeah. And
we'll find out pretty quickly, especially when it comes to ACC play, just how many horses NC State has, because those injuries are inevitably going to happen. So we'll see who's impacted, what types of things happen, and who has to step up for this.
If there's a team in the country to stay healthy, it certainly would be NC State. So
it'd be the team that ran 4 quarterbacks out last year.
Absolutely. And they literally don't have 4 this year. So anyways.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, they have 2 additional walk-ons on top of those players. But yes, last thing I want to talk about here too, just the impact of Garett Tujague too, taking over that position. Obviously, John Garrison's been there for multiple years, and ran the program the way he wanted to. And you've just gotten a feeling from the offensive line that from talking to multiple guys along the offensive line, when you get a chance to, that there's just that energy. There's a different type of energy that's been brought in. Obviously, schematics, we'll see what things look like once, we get around to that and once we get to that point. But, I guess, first of all, how good is it to have somebody that's brought in that injection of energy, but also have somebody that's worked in Robert and I's system for multiple years at a critical position, at a place where you're going to have to be able to block the exact position that they want on every single play? Well,
I think when you look at NC State, you're going from completely new offensive system, and it's kind of the perfect storm in my opinion. When you talk about a guy, Garett Tujague, offensive lineman, it's not a glamour position, but that coach, in my opinion, needs to be enthusiastic, needs to keep the morale up in that room, because you're going to get beat on every single play. An offensive lineman is going to get or there's going to be a penalty or something like that. So the connection he's been able to build, first of all, with the group quickly has been impressive. But the fact that he has worked with Robert and I, he is extremely familiar with this offense. I think that allows him to kind of expedite the teaching of what he's trying to get these guys to do. And I think that's going to be beneficial, especially as the year progresses. But I'm not sure, all things considered, Dave Doeren could have made 2 better hires offensively when you talk about Robert and I and Garett Tujague, and especially considering they've worked together. I just think that is so important. I don't know if there's if you had to, if this was on a separate deal and you had to hire a position coach with an OC, I think offensive line would be up at the top, because if the offensive line can't play at a high level, you're not going to be successful regardless of what is around the other parts, regardless of the other parts of the offense.
Yeah, and not to say that Robert and I like handpicked who his offensive line coach was, but he had a pretty big part in.
Well, and Tujague's an established guy. Both him, success, 30-year veterans, and I might be close to 40 years now. I mean, these guys would have been hired by numerous schools on their own merit. It just happens that, I'm sure Dave Doran didn't just hire them because they worked together. I think that was kind of a bonus in this deal. He hired them, first of all, because he felt like, good coaches. Second of all, because they're, known to be able to recruit. And, I think this has all just kind of fallen into place.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one thing that we've heard a ton of about.
Yeah, Tujague's really making a step. And then you've got a guy like Anai who's made headways with, not even being the lead recruiter, but being able to get guys on campus and explain his offense is already going a long way. And I know that's not why we're on this podcast, but it is worth mentioning since we're talking about the two guys.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you didn't see the Jonathan Paylor interview we had on Monday night, go back and watch that, because while he called him an A, it was, he talked a lot about the interaction that he had with him and how big of an impact that had, seeing that and knowing what he could be in that system too. So, yeah, these two obviously coming in and changing the outlook for, both of those, playmakers as well as offensive linemen. So we should be able to see kind of the fruits of their labor over the next couple years and being able to bring guys in. I think asking Garett Tujague to go out and recruit a great offensive line in his first class when he comes into NC State, probably not reasonable, but we should hopefully see what things look like over the next couple years between the 2025 and 2026 classes. If he sticks around at NC State and what he could potentially do on the recruiting trail, as well as being an offensive line coach. So, Michael, I appreciate you as always, man. Thank you for jumping on. I think that'll wrap this one up.
All right, Cory, we'll talk soon.
All right, guys. Well, thank you again to everybody for listening. We will have much more of these. We'll start to the defensive side of the football with defensive line on the next one. So thank you again for listening. We will talk to you again soon.